Canada-China relations, or Sino-Canadian relations, officially dates back to 1942, when Canada sent an ambassador to China. Before then, Canada had been represented by the British ambassador. The Communist victory in the Chinese Civil War caused a break in relations that lasted until 1970, when Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau became one of the first Western leaders to recognize the People's Republic of China. Since 1997, Hong Kong has been an official part of China, and relations have been aggravated of late by the tensions between the Communist Party of China and the protesters in that city. China was one of Canada's largest trading partners in Asia for a few years. Including 2017, it was Canada's top export market and it was Canada's top import supplier in Asia. On the other hand, Canada had a significant trade imbalance, importing 44.235 billion Canadian dollars more from China than the value of its exports to that country in 2016. For example, as part of the British Empire and later the Commonwealth of Nations, Canada did not establish a foreign ministry until 1909 and developed an independent foreign policy only after the passage of the Statute of Westminster 1931. Canada posted 1/3 of 6 battalions to Hong Kong before the Battle of Hong Kong, which was lost to the Japanese Imperial Army. From the 25th of December 1941 to the 16th of September 1945, more than a month after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Canada established embassies overseas only in the 1940s, and in 1942, Canada posted its first ambassador in the Chinese wartime nationalist capital of Chongqing. The embassy was moved to Nanjing in 1946. Canada faced a dilemma following the Communist victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949. On many issues, Canada followed the lead of British and the United States, but those two governments followed different policies on China. The United Kingdom, under the control of a socialist government, extended diplomatic recognition to the Communist Chinese, but the United States refused to recognize the Communist government. After the Liberal victory in the Canadian federal election of 1949 and more discussion, Canada followed the British approach. The Canadian embassy in Nanjing was kept open, and Canada posted a charge d'affaires. By June 23, 1950, the Canadian Department of External Affairs had prepared instructions for the charge to open negotiations with the Chinese government for an exchange of ambassadors. However, the Korean War began 2 days later, on June 25, 1950, with Canadian troops fighting for the United Nations forces, which opposed Communist Chinese troops. The continuation of diplomatic relations became untenable. After Canada voted in favor of a UN resolution that branded China an aggressor, the Chinese government asked the Canadian charge d'affaires to leave. The Canadian embassy in Nanjing was closed on February 26, 1951. Thereafter, Canada maintained diplomatic relations with the Republic of China, whose government had evacuated to Taiwan after losing to the Communists. However, Canada did not send an ambassador to the nationalist Chinese capital of Taipei. Instead, relations were maintained through the nationalist Chinese ambassador in Ottawa. Diplomatic relations between the PRC and Canada were established on 13 October 1970. In October 1973, Pierre Trudeau became the first Canadian Prime Minister to pay an official visit to the PRC, meeting Mao Zedong. In that year, the trade balance was heavily weighted in Canada's favor. The Canadian government was optimistic about the PRC's market-oriented reforms of the 1970s and 1980s, but it was difficult to see much substantial improvement as the Cultural Revolution raged. It was not until the consolidation of reformers like Deng Xiaoping and Zhao Ziyang that Chinese life began to calm. In October 1983, the Foreign Minister of PRC visited Canada and signed the Agreement on Developing Cooperation between China and Canada. In 1984, Chinese Premier Zhao Ziyang visited the second Trudeau government 6 months before it fell, and became the first communist leader to address Parliament of Canada. Zhao signed the Agreement on the Protection of Investment between China and Canada. Zhao would later be subject to 15 years of house arrest until his death, because he opposed the Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989. In May 1986, the Mulroney government in China signed with Zhao the Agreement on Prevention of Double Taxation and Tax Evasions between China and Canada. Early in their tenures under Jean Chrétien, Ministers Alan Rock and André Ole felt it beneficial to sign a treaty with China that gave the Chinese access to the powers of the Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Act. And in fact it was signed in Beijing by the latter in July 1994. Chrétien accompanied to China about 300 business leaders on a trade mission in November 1994 who returned with an order book of $9 billion. Senior figures in government like International Trade Minister Roy M.